one of the things I learned from those guys, I was angry for a long time. These guys stole from me, and that never feels good. But they did give me an opportunity to learn a trade,
Hmm.
and they also taught me how not to behave, how not to treat people.
Hmm.
I remember one time my quote partner we were going to lunch, and he says, I have to stop at the bank to deposit all this cash in the bank in a safe deposit box. I said, well, why not just put it in the bank? He says, well, when you're in business for yourself, you get sued a lot. So it's better not to have your money in the bank so creditors can't find it. I'm like,
Huh.
you get sued a lot? That's just how it is?
Yeah.
Well, that's how it is if you're not honorable.
Right.
And so just little signals I should have seen along the way. But I think the differentiator when we were going through this IPO process was, well, one, they were bigger, but our profit margins were much wider than them. So I think we ran a better company despite the fact that they had size
Ah.
over us. So, part of what I started figuring out along the way as an entrepreneur is, you can succeed in a number of different ways. You can go into a business where you're doing the same thing as everybody else is doing, but just try to do it better or try to work a little harder.
Hmm.
Or you could do something no one else is doing and innovate. And
Hmm.
so in the mortgage business, it's a commodity. And, people would say to me, well, how are you going to compete against Chase Manhattan and Wells Fargo and Countrywide, which was big at the time? And I said, I'm not really competing against them. I'm just going out there looking for a tiny little piece of this vast market. And if I get a tiny little piece, I'm going to be fine.
Hmm.
People sometimes get afraid to make a mistake, so they won't try something, or, they'll hope somebody else tries it because it's hard. And so we just say, at every meeting, if we don't get this right, it's okay. If you break something, it's fine. But we have to make progress every day. And as long as we're making progress, we'll learn from that progress and we'll
Yeah.
get better and we'll be able to pivot, figure things out. And I can't tell you how many meetings we'll have where, we'll get stuck and someone will go, oh, I'm stuck here. This isn't working. So we'll say, well, let's talk about the progress we've made so we can still feel good about where we're stuck and then figure out where to go from here. And so the next core value would be know the goal.
Okay.
And we sit in meetings, and like every meeting, you get shot off into tangents, and you were here talking about this, and next thing you're talking about that. And somebody, and it isn't going to be me, someone will stop and say, core values, know the goal. What is it we're trying to accomplish right now? And let's make sure that every word that's spoken from this point forward in the meeting is centered on solving for whatever the goal is today.
Hmm.
And that's a language that we don't just use in our executive meetings, but these are the executives take it down to their downlines, and they use that language in their own meetings, and it makes people real comfortable. And then another one is say cheese.
Say cheese.
It's silly, but sometimes things get tense. And I've had actually employees say back to me, if they'll see me with some type of a grimace on my face because of some stress that the regulators or whatever, and they'll go say cheese, and what happens is we both smile, just like you do when the guy holding the camera says say cheese. He
Yeah.
smiles too usually, and just say, hey, it's like lighten up, like this
Yeah.
isn't going to kill any of us. So let's just realize that although this is work and it's hard and stressful, like this isn't life or death. So say cheese was kind of our way of reminding each other of that.
Hmm.
And then the last one, well, there's two, we added another one. The last one was try it on, especially with technology and processes. Or how do you manage the national sales force? Well, do you break the big accounts into groups, or do you let one guy handle it? And everybody has a different opinion. And one of the things we realize is we're not going to always agree. So at some point, someone will go, okay, we don't agree. Why don't we do this one? And I'm not saying this is the right one, but let's try it on.
Hmm.
Let's see how it works. And if it doesn't work, okay, no harm, no foul. We'll try something else. So try it on has been sort of a good core value that enables us to know that we don't have to have the exact right solution for everything we're going to try. Bringing me back, good question. So early on, traditional mom, dad, brother, living in a modest home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Hmm.
My parents split up though when I was 10, so that changed pretty dramatically.
Hmm.
And mom moved to Clearwater, Florida with me and my brother. We were in sleepaway camp, and when she came to pick us up, we were told we don't live with
Oh, wow.
dad anymore.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
a little shocking, but yeah. So she was very influential in, I guess, shaping who I became as a grown up. She didn't go to college; neither of my parents did. and she had to go to work for the first time ever,
Yeah.
and she got a job with it was ADP, entry level position, and worked really hard just to put food on the table for me and my brother. And she made sure we had everything we wanted. There was nothing extra left over
Hmm.
by any means.
Yeah.
And so the dinner table was oftentimes mac and cheese or spaghetti, a lot of carbs. They were
Yeah.
inexpensive.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
but she worked a lot, so I learned to cook for myself and take care of whatever I needed to take care of to become self-sufficient at a really early age. And that was
Yeah.
maybe the spawning of my entrepreneurial sort of personality.
And that's where I just was. I thought that might be one of the first inspirations to that. Were you the kid that was, since you didn't have much, were you always trying to make money other places, generate money somehow selling gum or candy or anything like that?
That's funny you say that. Yeah, so one of the things my mom did a really good job of is making sure that we always lived in a neighborhood where there were good schools. And oftentimes that meant, we were the poorest kids on the block. And so my friends all had more than I did. And as a teenager, you want to be able to do the things your friends do and have what they have. So I had two approaches. One was more juvenile delinquency, and the other was figure out how to do it honestly, the
Yeah,
harder
yeah,
way.
yeah.
So I remember when I was in middle school, I was I don't know, somebody introduced me to cinnamon toothpicks, where you get these toothpicks and you
Yeah, I remember that.
douse them in the really hot cinnamon oil.
Yeah.
So I was making cinnamon toothpicks and selling them to kids at school until someone was allergic and I had a problem. And and then a few months later, I started making slingshots and ammunition out of wire that I would find by the near the telephone company boxes.
Okay. Would you just like ball the wire up and that was what was getting shot out?
So you take these big bobby pins and you'd bend them into like a slingshot shape.
Okay.
And then I take wire and tightly wrap it around the bobby pin, taking a broken rubber band and putting one end at each side. And yeah, they were really cool. Everybody loved them, but the little pieces of ammunition were also a double folded up piece of wire as well.
Yeah.
And it hurt when you hit somebody. So I got sent to the dean's office again.
I love it. I love it. That's great. That's great. So what happened? What happened next? I assume you went through high school and all of that. Did you do college, or
Yeah,
what was kind of your next
yeah.
step?
Mom drilled in my head, get an education. So my brother and I were the first in our family ever to attend college.
Mhm.
Worked my way through school, went to University of Florida, waited tables and bartended to get myself through school, plus several other jobs, and managed to graduate with a degree in accounting. Had B-ish average, but that
Mhm.
was cum laude at University of Florida because it was a pretty tough accounting program.
Yeah.
And but I had always worked, from the selling little stuff. Through high school, I sold peepholes door to door. Just
Peepholes, on your front door peepholes?
yeah, like we'd find
Really?
these apartment complexes with hundreds of apartments that didn't have peepholes in the door.
Oh my God.
So we'd knock on the door and somebody would say, "Who is it?" And we'd say, "If you had a peephole, you wouldn't have to ask."
It's a great pitch. I
So
love
we
it.
printed up cards. We were S&S Security, the peephole people.
It's great.
Yeah, so I went to college. The plan was go to law school and become an attorney. And in 1989, when I was when I was applying to law school, if you're old enough, you remember there was a pretty deep recession going on at that time, and there weren't a lot of jobs. So most of my peers, instead of graduating and getting a job, they said, "Oh, well, why don't we apply to law school or medical school or graduate school?" So the applications for law school skyrocketed that year, and my safe schools became reaches, and I wasn't getting into the schools I wanted to. So I decided, why don't I get a job and do that for a year or two, and then go to law school.
Mhm.
And so that was the plan. And so I ended up, University of Florida at the on-campus interviews. All the big 8 accounting firms used to come and do interviews. And this was kind of backup plan to law school. So I only caught the last day of interviews. I had one interview with Price Waterhouse, and they asked me, "Which office are you interviewing for?" Choices being Tampa, Fort Lauderdale, Miami. Or, I
Yeah.
said, "How about New York?" I don't know where that came from. Just kind of pulled it out of the air because I was still thinking I was going to law school. And so anyway, long story short, they flew me to New York for an interview. I looked at it as a free weekend to the Big Apple.
Yeah.
They ended up offering me a job, and I decided to take it.
Yeah.
So last day of school, I got a U-Haul, hooked it up to a borrowed car, pulled all my stuff to the Big Apple, and found a roommate, got an apartment, worked for Price Waterhouse for a very short 10 months until I was recruited by some guys to help them start a mortgage business. And that's a whole long saga in and of itself. But, I wasn't really cut out for auditing. I think it's a great profession, but it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm sitting here counting the things that others are doing. I'd rather be doing the things that others are doing.
Right. Yeah.
And so I leapt at the chance to join these guys. I sort of took a flyer and joined these guys and quit my job, started this mortgage business with them in 1990. That was really my first real foray into the business universe.
Yeah. And was there, I mean, I can't remember 1990. There was a little bit before I was, hunting for mortgages or anything like that. Was that a good time to get into the mortgage industry, or is that when things were kind of in turmoil?
So mortgage brokering was new. Rates were starting to come down, so there was a lot of refinancing activity going on. But the guys that recruited me to go into the business were kind of scam artists. They were flipping co-op apartments, to people who were uninformed, who didn't know what they were worth, and then they'd have somebody appraise them higher than they were worth, and then they'd have that uninformed person get a mortgage so they could buy this property at a price that was way more than it was worth. Long story, but I was one of those uninformed buyers that they tried to scam, and instead of running for the hills, I ended up joining them in the, I was enamored by how savvy they were. They were young guys in their early 20s, and they had a business, and they were selling real estate. And when they recruited me to help start this mortgage business, I kind of forgot that I was their victim first. Made some mistakes, and I ended up helping them start this business. And the business did really well because there was, a lot of refinancing activity going on, but there was still some purchase business, and mortgage brokering, other than hard money, mortgage brokering for, conventional loans was pretty new back then. And so, taught myself the business, dialing banks up out of the yellow pages and saying, hey, I have a borrower who needs a loan. Here's how much money he makes. Does he qualify? Like, just knew nothing about it. And over the course of several months, I learned how to do it, and started hustling for clients and hiring more people. And the business started to grow. And about 2 years in, these guys decided to throw me out and steal everything that I had built. And my credit cards were maxed out. My student loans were raging. I had no income, no money in the bank, and it was a pretty bleak time. So I went from, I'm living the American dream, I own a piece of this business in New York City, and from where I came from, far exceeding my expectations from an earnings standpoint, and everything was great. And then the whole thing flipped into everything is not so great. And a lot of great lessons learned. Didn't have any of my ownership in writing. Just stupid. Having not had like really a mentor or role model to help me not make these mistakes. I made every mistake a young entrepreneur can make, but boy, you learn fast.
Absolutely. And so that was kind of going to be my next, obviously you continued on in the entrepreneurial, path after that. How long did it take you to get back on your feet after that? I mean, would you consider that your low point in your career? Was that?
I was facing bankruptcy at 23 years old. And the irony was, I'm in the only thing I know how to do now is in the credit markets, and I knew how important good credit was. And here I am, I'm going to have this
bad credit.
But I got a little lucky. I met a guy he was a friend of my brother's, and he saw how kind of despondent I was from what had happened to me, and he says, well, what are you going to do about it? I'm like, I have no idea. I guess I have to go find a job doing something. So why don't you start a mortgage company? And, I don't have any money to start. It takes money to start a business. Anyway, he decided to lend me $15,000. And that was enough money to incorporate myself, pay my rent for a few months, pay my credit card bills, my student loans, and just, get a license and get myself into business. So I used that $15,000, started the company out of my bedroom, at my tiny little midtown apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and just started hustling, just trying to find real estate brokers who would send me buyers who needed mortgages. And, with no overhead because I was working from my apartment,
Sure.
every commission, 100 cents on the dollar dropped to the bottom line. I was able to pay all my bills, actually end up paying off my credit cards. And I hired another person, took a little office, and just,
Grew from
never
there.
for a minute in my mind did I have any doubt whatsoever that this would be successful.
Yeah.
I just programmed to look forward, run as fast as I could, and it was working. So I ended up taking that little one-man shop that I started in my apartment, and now I have an office with 20 or 30 people in it, and the business is growing. Started opening up other offices around the New York region, and a few years later, we converted from mortgage brokering to mortgage lending. So we
Mm-hmm.
got the requisite credit lines that we needed from the banks to be able to make loans. And 10 years later, this is a 1,000-person company with 65 offices in 25 states. We're doing billions of dollars a year in home loans.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up forming a mortgage REIT and taking the whole thing public.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so in 2004, it's about 10 years into this adventure. And by the way, having never raised a dollar of capital outside of that first $15,000 that my brother's friend lent me, everything was just organic growth.
Yeah.
And I look back, and not raising capital may not have been the smartest thing. Maybe I could have done more faster, but I was still thrilled with what was happening. And in 2004, I took the company public, rang the bell on the New York Stock
Oh,
Exchange,
that's
had
amazing.
a liquidity event, and just a great ride. And it was a lot of fun, really exciting time for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So with the REIT that you formed, what I guess what made you want to go down that path and create the REIT? And what was it that you were going to purchase with it? Did you have any type of focus or?
Yeah, great question. So as a mortgage banker, we're making loans and we're selling them. And, I would really have liked to have, we were a Manhattan-based company, so we were doing a lot of, really jumbo, super high credit quality loans you'd love to keep.
Yeah.
As a mortgage banker, they give you a credit line, you make the loan, you sell the loan, pay back the line, and you do it over and over again. I couldn't find a credit facility that would let me hold loans for investment. They would only let me hold them short term and sell them. So I thought about maybe forming a bank so that I could build a permanent portfolio of loans versus
Mm-hmm.
having to sell them all. And I met a guy who worked for a mortgage REIT out in Santa Fe, and they were one of the firms we were selling loans to. So we would originate the loan, fund it on our credit line, sell it to them. They would securitize it, either hold it in portfolio or sell the bonds, or a variety of different strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came up with this idea. All the mortgage REITs that existed at the time were they were leveraged MBS portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't originate or make loans. They either bought MBS and leveraged them, or they bought loans, securitized them, and leveraged them.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought if we could be the originator and the aggregator, securitizer, and portfolio all in one, that we would disintermediate all these middlemen, and our yields on our mortgage REIT would be higher than the yields on other mortgage REITs because we vertically integrated and cut out all these layers.
Yeah.
And so that had not been done before. I took it to Wall Street, met with a bunch of investment bankers, and they all loved the idea. And they said, this is bankable. Your company's growing, it's profitable. Now you have this differentiated strategy that we think we can raise capital around. And we ended up doing so. And the interesting thing that happened is the guys that screwed me at an early age and took everything from me, that business had grown on a similar course as mine had, much larger because they had a head start and they had money. But when I filed my S-11, which is the IPO offering document, now your whole strategy becomes public.
Yeah.
They basically copied it almost verbatim. If you opened it up and read it,
wow.
It sounded like you were reading ours. And they decided to do an IPO with the same strategy at the same time as us. And so we were literally raising capital. And if you're familiar with how the IPO process works, you basically get in a chartered jet and you fly city to city to city, pitching your investment to all these different firms, hedge funds and private equity and other things. And I'd be at certain cities where there they were, like at the same time,
That is
chasing
incredible.
each other around. So interesting, way this whole thing played out. And the beauty for me was when we landed back at Teterboro in New Jersey, and I'm on the phone with the bankers. And, how's the capital raise going? And they said, well, the good news is we've raised the money. And so, we had established a price for the IPO and we were going to close. And he says, and the better news is your friends over at the other company didn't get their deal done. They failed. They failed
Oh,
to raise
wow.
money. And I was like, yes.
Yeah.
Not
Now,
that I wish ill on anyone, but they got.
but so was there, you said that they were basically pitching the same story or the same pitch or the same, business model. Was there any difference? Were you the difference basically in how you pitched it? I mean, was that the difference, do you know, or any thoughts on what made you stand out over basically the same idea at the same time?
One of the things I learned from those guys, I was angry for a long time. These guys stole from me, and that never feels good. But they did give me an opportunity to learn a trade,
Hmm.
and they also taught me how not to behave, how not to treat people.
Hmm.
I remember one time my quote partner we were going to lunch, and he says, I have to stop at the bank to deposit all this cash in the bank in a safe deposit box. I said, well, why not just put it in the bank? He says, well, when you're in business for yourself, you get sued a lot. So it's better not to have your money in the bank so creditors can't find it. I'm like,
Huh.
you get sued a lot? That's just how it is?
Yeah.
Well, that's how it is if you're not honorable.
Right.
And so just little signals I should have seen along the way. But I think the differentiator when we were going through this IPO process was, well, one, they were bigger, but our profit margins were much wider than them. So I think we ran a better company despite the fact that they had size
Ah.
over us. But I think that my genuineness, I'm very candid. If you ask me a hard question and I don't have a good answer, I'm going to give you the not the good answer.
Yeah.
And I think I've always felt that transparency, whether you're trying to get somewhere or you're resolving a dispute or whatever it is, if both parties are as transparent as they possibly can be, you're going to get to the finish line. But if people are posing or pretending,
Yeah.
or trying to make something sound like it isn't, and that's kind of what kind of guys these guys were.
Mhm.
And maybe it showed. They ended up getting their deal repriced and they succeeded several months later. But for me, it felt good at the moment that I was
Sure.
able to accomplish something that they didn't. And other than that example in my life, I hope everybody does exceedingly well. It's great to be surrounded by successful people. I think
Mhm. Yeah.
success feeds on itself. When you have an environment where people are forward thinking and entrepreneurial and inventing and innovating, that's great. Just those guys. Maybe not so much
Just
those
not those
guys.
guys, yeah.
Just not those guys.
That's great. That's great. So you mentioned before in the green room about fintech. Are you playing in that space now? I mean, and I'm a little bit ignorant on what fintech is exactly. So maybe if you could even describe that, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
So part of what I started figuring out along the way as an entrepreneur is, you can succeed in a number of different ways. You can go into a business where you're doing the same thing as everybody else is doing, but just try to do it better or try to
Mhm.
work a little harder.
Mhm.
Or you could do something no one else is doing and innovate. And
Mhm.
so in the mortgage business, it's a commodity. And, people would say to me, well, how are you going to compete against Chase Manhattan and Wells Fargo and Countrywide, which was big at the time? And I said, I'm not really competing against them. I'm just going out there looking for a tiny little piece of this vast market. And if I get a tiny little piece, I'm going to be fine.
Yeah.
So in 2006, the mortgage market sort of hit this peak and we started to see some cracks. And if you saw The Big Short, or if you were just
Yeah.
alive, you
Yeah.
knew what happened in the
Yeah.
credit markets. But the guys, I like to refer to that movie because the guys, the characters are based upon, they saw this credit crisis coming, and so did I. There was, unless you had a vested interest in perpetuating it, I think you would have seen it coming. And so I went to my board. I said, yeah, I know we just went public 2 years ago, but we need to get out of the business. Seriously, I think bad stuff's coming. And that's a synopsis, but I painted them a picture, and they were nervous about exiting so soon after we entered the public markets. But I
Mhm.
convinced them that it was time. I ended up selling the company in 2007, just ahead of the credit crisis that was about to come. And then I was kind of, I wouldn't say retired because I always knew I would do other things, but I was looking around at the environment, and one of the things that happened after the last credit crisis was that it became really hard for people to get home loans, even people who were deserving, because so many banks were reeling from the losses associated with all those crazy loans that had been done leading up to the credit crisis. And I saw an opportunity to fill a void. You have a lot of small business owners, a lot of immigrants, a lot of different subs, seniors, gig economy workers, which was kind of a new term then.
Right. Yeah.
And these guys couldn't get loans from banks, even though they may have had, a down payment to make in good credit, because the way they earned their money or their track record or their documentation wasn't pristine. And so I said, if I'm going to re-engage in the mortgage business, I'd like to solve for some of the problems that a mortgage company has, namely, you're operating on credit lines, and those markets have proven to be volatile. When the economy does poorly, you could lose your credit lines and you're out of business.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to be able to build a portfolio, as I had spoken about. So the bank solved for both of those things. I could use consumer deposits to build a lending business, and I'd have a permanent balance sheet. Not to mention the fact that as a bank, you're preempted from having to get licensed in every state, so we become a national lender. So I looked around, I said, this is a great opportunity to run into a market that everybody's running out of. And so I consulted with a couple of people. I said, look, what would it take for me to buy a bank or become a bank? And I got some advice early on, and the advice I got was, don't do it. You have to have your head examined to do this. And it's too hard. The regulatory environment is too burdensome. You're going to be too small to compete, and every reason people gave me not to do it. And usually when people tell me not to do something,
that's when
I tend to run right at it.
Yeah.
But I thought I was smarter than them, and I had a strategy. I'm going to make loans that others won't make, charge a little more for it because I'm taking some risk.
Yeah.
And I also thought, and I was early, I thought, people aren't going to, the internet is here to stay. And, we didn't know exactly what it was going to become. I said, people aren't going to want to go into bank branches anymore. And I'm going to do something where I don't open bank branches. And I'm going to, I didn't even know what I was talking about, building a business on the internet in terms of a depository on the internet. But we ultimately, so the plan was be branchless and lend to people others won't lend to. I said, and the combination of those two things will enable me to compete. And the lend to people others won't lend to worked really well. But be branchless without a full-blown internet strategy wasn't working. And so we had to pivot pretty aggressively to be able to figure out how to generate business deposits, how to get customers, savings accounts, checking accounts, CDs online. And that's where all the innovation really hit, because technology is complicated, especially for bankers who know banking but don't know technology. Marketing on the internet is complicated if all you've ever done was had brick and mortar salespeople and put signs in the window and ads in the paper.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot to figure out, but I saw it as an opportunity. So two things happened to us. Number one, we were making so many loans to underbanked households that we became eligible to become a community development financial institution, or CDFI. And that is a U.S. Treasury designation given to financial institutions that focus on lending to low-income households, or Blacks and Hispanics, or Native Americans, or other targeted populations that are overlooked by other banks. And as a CDFI, it helped us to get some grants. It helped us to get exemptions from some regulations that made it hard to make home loans, but so it became easier for us to do so. And that really supercharged our lending business. And now we're making reasonably good profits. Said time to reinvest all of that into technology and figure out how to be this, what we call ourselves, an adaptive digital bank now. And so we really, and that meant I had to bring in new people. I hired a chief innovation officer, brilliant young guy who helped me a lot with technology and internet marketing and culture building. I hired a chief empowerment officer, which is somebody whose job is to just make sure not only our customers, but our employees feel inclusiveness and empowered and have career trajectory and upward mobility, that their voice is heard. Hired a chief people officer whose job was career development and leadership training and building KPIs and metrics around measuring people's performance. So even though we're working remote now, people still know if they're doing the right thing. But ultimately, we figured out in order to become a digital bank and to use technology and to do it virtually, this is a fast forward to today, we had to get really good at culture. And I saw a show on one of the airlines. They have the TVs in the back of the seats, and they were interviewing this young woman who was touting all of her success she attributed to her people, and everybody says that. But how culture. And so, I took that away as a lesson, and I said, we really need to focus on the people part of the business, the culture part of the business, and not in a way that, you're just serving platitudes, like our culture, our core values are integrity and honesty.
Yeah.
Those are table stakes, but what really are our core values? And how do you really get people aligned? And this is a segue to the technology. We everything we tried to do in technology, we couldn't do because we're asking bankers to do things they've never done before. That's really hard, and it causes tension, and it causes stress, and all these other things. But we found if we could build culture, we could do anything. And there's a famous quote, and I have no idea who said it, but culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
You could have the best product, the best service, the best everything, but if you don't have the right culture, good luck with that.
And so what were some of the things that you learned? Because obviously you've done very, very well with putting the right people in the right positions. And I guess being able to filter, I guess is the right word, being able to find the right type of people for your particular culture. What are some of the techniques or tips that you've learned along the way that help you make those types of decisions?
Well, first and foremost, I knew what I was good at and what I wasn't good at. And one of the things that I wasn't great at was recruiting the best people. And because that's a discipline and a skill that's learned over years. And
Yeah.
I said, there's somebody that can learn, not just recruiting and cultivating.
Yeah.
And I was introduced to a guy who was a consultant, and his business was helping companies do talent development, culture building, things like that. And he had helped a friend of mine's company grow. It's before becoming a consultant, grow from very small to thousands of people, and a lot of the tools that they used and the tricks that they learned were taught by this guy. And so one of the most important things I did was brought in someone who can help me to figure out how to attract the best talent, how to recruit them. We recruit internally. We'll use headhunters, but we try to recruit mostly internally, and and how to filter for the right personality traits, like cultural fit. You have two people on paper who have the same resume. They're both qualified. One may be a great cultural fit and one may not be. And how do you figure out who it is? Because most people are trained to ask, tell me about a challenge you've overcome, and describe to me, the skills and resume stuff. And so Mike Lance, our chief people officer, really helped turn that upside down and said, let's try to figure out how to hire people who are a good fit. And that isn't easy to do.
No, not at all.
So we would do cute things like, I don't know if we're still doing it, but like we would ask recruits to film a TikTok video.
Okay.
Why? Well, just because you may have never done one before, and A, see if you can figure it out, and B, see if you're comfortable doing something like totally outside of your normal comfort zone. And it's a weird thing, but as part of an interview process, we're trying to figure out how to get to who you are as a person. And and we do a lot around that, and that helps us to find the right people. But the other thing we did was we cast our recruitment net nationally, and we were doing that already, and then COVID just accelerated it, because once everybody has to go work remotely, you have to figure out how to run a business remotely. If you figure out how to run a business remotely, if you do it well and it works, and you can maintain strong culture and strong engagement and strong buy-in, and you say, well, I don't just have to recruit people in the New York metropolitan area. I can recruit people from anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're able to bring in talent you would have never found before.
Yeah.
So, you know, our like for instance, our chief technology officer lives in Alabama, and our head of digital products lives in Louisville, and my chief marketing officer lives in DC. And my CFO, we have a guy who's consultant CFO lives in Chicago, and my chief information security officer is in Vegas. I mean, this is a virtual company now. And if you could get culture down and figure out how to keep engagement despite being remote, the heavens open up to you in terms of who you're able to attract. Some businesses it doesn't work for.
Yeah.
You know, if there are businesses where, you know, you're hiring young people out of college and they need hands-on training and supervision, and they need to hear and absorb from others around them, then maybe being in the office has to work for you. But if you're in a business that has a lot of replicated functions, people are doing this sort of the same thing day in and day out, and they can get really good at it just by measuring their performance, giving them feedback, and compensating them on KPIs, the other key performance indicators. That all of those things go into recruiting the right team. And then I think the next part of it is, don't be short-sighted. To the extent that you can, stretch and be willing to pay for the talent that you need. You know, we've reinvented our C-suite over the last few years, and it's night and day for a CEO to have senior management that really does everything.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, I don't need to get 500 emails a day and then have to figure out, you know, work through the night and weekends. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
My weekends are mine.
Yeah.
Because I've spread the work amongst senior managers who are the absolute right persons for people for the job. And it you know, the team gels well. And that wasn't the case for years. You know, before we figured out this, I don't want to rant on about culture, but before we figured it out, you know, it was hard. We'd have toxic environment at times. You know, two managers don't get along. We don't know how to fix that. You know, call a meeting and, you know, have them hash it out, and then they go back and nothing changes.
Yeah.
So, but, you know, it revolves around having a common vernacular. You know, it revolves around having core values that everybody buys into, the way we speak to each other, the way we engage with difficult situations, difficult problems. And so I'll share with you what the core values are. And these were, you know, a sort of a cohesive effort amongst all managers to come up with what do we really need to be focusing on. And so one was, especially as a bank trying to become a technology company, progress, not perfection. You know, people sometimes get afraid to make a mistake, so they won't try something, or, you know, they'll hope somebody else tries it because it's hard. And so we just say, you know, at every meeting, if we don't get this right, it's okay. If you break something, it's fine. But we have to make progress every day. And as long as we're making progress, we'll learn from that progress, and we'll get better, and we'll be able to pivot and figure things out. And I can't tell you how many meetings we'll have where, you know, we'll get stuck and someone will go, oh, I'm stuck here, this isn't working. So we'll say, well, let's talk about the progress we've made so we can still feel good about where we're stuck, and then figure out where to go from here. And so the next core value would be know the goal. Okay. And we sit in meetings, and like every meeting, you get shot off into tangents, and you were here talking about this, and next thing you're talking about that. And somebody, and it isn't going to be me, someone will stop and say, core values, know the goal. What is it we're trying to accomplish right now? And let's make sure that every word that's spoken from this point forward in the meeting is centered on solving for whatever the goal is today. And that's a language that we don't just use in our executive meetings, but these are the executives take it down to their downlines, and they use that language in their own meetings. And it makes people real comfortable. And then another one is say cheese.
Say cheese.
It's silly, but yes, sometimes things get tense. And, you know, I've had actually employees say back to me, if they'll see me with some type of a grimace on my face because of some stress that, you know, the regulators or whatever, and they'll go say cheese. And what happens is we both smile, you know, just like you do when the guy holding the camera says say cheese, he smiles too usually. And just say, hey, it's like lighten up, like this isn't going to kill any of us. So let's just realize that although this is work and it's hard and stressful, like this, you know, this isn't life or death. So say cheese was kind of our way of reminding each other of that. And then the last one, well, there's two, we added another one. The last one was try it on, uh, especially with technology and processes. Or how do you manage the national sales force? Well, do you break the big accounts into groups, or do you let one guy handle it? And everybody has a different opinion. And one of the things we realize is we're not going to always agree. So at some point, someone will go, okay, we don't agree. Why don't we do this one? And I'm not saying this is the right one, but let's try it on.
Mhm.
Let's see how it works. And if it doesn't work, okay, no harm, no foul. We'll try something else. So try it on has been sort of a good core value that enables us to know that we don't have to have the exact right solution for everything we're going to try.
Mhm.
And then the last one that we just added, because we had four, I think four is plenty, but we added a fifth. It's embrace conflict, respectfully.
Okay.
And so, it's inevitable that somebody will step on somebody else, and maybe not knowingly, but the other person will think it was intentional or think that the other person has some agenda. And I'm like, you know what? Usually, let's just assume positive intent, which could clearly be another core value, but we have enough.
Mhm.
Assume positive intent. If somebody did something that offended you or treaded on your area or hurt you or undermined you, let's come at it with, I'm assuming the person didn't mean it the way I'm interpreting it, and I'm going to go run to that conflict, and I'm going to embrace that conflict, and I'm going to have it out with that person, but I'm going to do it in a respectful way. And as long as that person's coming at it with the same mindset, we're going to resolve this. And that's hard, and it doesn't
Yeah,
happen that way all the
absolutely.
time. But at least we talk about it, and if you talk about it, then it manifests itself in reality. So that's a long rant about core values, but they really work. And
So
your core values could be something entirely different, but that's what
no,
we thought
so,
we.
so I wanted to get into that a little bit because it's interesting. I've never heard core values stated the way that you've stated them, because you kind of like brushed off the typical core values. Normally they're a word, or maybe a phrase, but yours were all like action based. They all had a purpose, and they sort of flowed into one another, which I think is really interesting. Normally you don't hear that with any of the core values. Was that something that you did intentionally, or you realized, or did you learn that from somewhere? Was there books, or is that from your people officer? Like where did that inspiration come from?
All right, here's my big takeaway. If I was going to tell an entrepreneur anything, I don't know anything. I never read a business book in my life. I never hired a consultant to tell me how to do something better. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to solve problems. I'm going to bat things down. And that always worked, but that only gets you so far. It wasn't until recently that I started to engage some consultants, and I read, I love Pat Lencioni, for instance, is a
Mhm.
great, author of management style books. And there's a lot you can be taught by somebody else. So we had a management offsite, and this goes back a few years now. And I brought in a consultant to help us to organize a management offsite. How do you figure out what are the most important things you need to be working on?
Mhm.
How is the day and the next day is supposed to go? But one of the things we did was we built that offsite around one of Pat Lencioni's books, and you could pick your author, but this consultant happened to be a big fan of this guy, and so as a byproduct of that, I have become. But and I won't get this exactly right, but answering the 6 questions, like so let's start with, okay, managers, why do we exist?
Mhm.
What exactly does this company exist to do? Simple question, but sometimes it's hard to answer.
Yeah.
What are the most important things we're supposed to be working on right now? Who does what? That sometimes isn't clear. So there were, in this particular illustration, there was a handful of questions that if you start to answer those questions, then you're going to start to figure out what your company is made of, where it's going, who's responsible to do what, and then you insert into that the core values that are necessary for your company to do the things you just defined your company needs to do. And that
Interesting.
what didn't come from me. I got it from a guy, and
Yeah.
it's learnable. Like
Yeah.
it's learnable, it's teachable, it's replicable, but it requires intentionality.
Yeah.
And you're not going to build culture in a day. You're not going to build core values by sitting in a meeting for 15 minutes and going, okay, teamwork is really an important one.
Yeah.
Well, no shit. Integrity, same. So those are the core values you typically hear. but we said, let's all embrace values that reflect who this company is and where this company is trying to get. If we were a manufacturer or something else, we probably have different, they might be around safety or that kind of thing. But again, there are people out there that have spent their entire careers learning how to do this stuff, and they can teach it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that you can find people to bring in-house on your management team, like we've been successful in doing, then that's game changing. Now, this isn't necessarily startup stuff, because startups oftentimes don't have the budget to do things like this. But if you are starting up something, or even early stage, you need to put some thought and focus into how you're going to build your culture, how you're going to build your core values, and set the company up right from the onset. And the corollary to the story I was telling about the woman who I saw on the TV in the back of this screen on the Delta Airlines flight, I wanted to, a few days later, I was telling some of my coworkers about, look, this woman, like she started this, not to throw anybody under the bus, some innovative suitcase company. I don't know.
Okay.
And I was blown away by the things she was saying. And so I emailed a story about her to somebody on my management team, and they emailed me back a story that she was just fired as CEO of her own company for fostering a toxic culture.
Oh my God.
I'm like, what? So the point is, these can't just be words. Like,
yeah, right. Exactly. You gotta follow up with them.
Really live it.
And that's what yours do. I mean, again, it's action based, so you guys can actually live it out. It's not something you have to remember. It's, like you said, you're in that moment when you're pissed off or somebody's pissed off, and being able to, have that in the back of your head as a tool to be able to, provide some levity to that situation. Say, geez, I love that. I love that. That is really, really powerful. I mean, because we have all of our core values laid out too. And again, they're more words, things that mean, something to us. And again, we're trying to attract people, like you said, that those words identify and resonate with them as well. But they're words, they're not necessarily actions. It's not something that you can actually live out and express, in different situations, and sort of use as tools to be able to navigate through. So maybe we'll have to go back.
Whatever you say it is.
Yeah. That's very true. But no, I love your core values and the approach that you have taken with it. And obviously, it's been very, very successful, helping you build your company as well. So great job. Great job. Excellent. Well, Steve, if people want to learn more about you or your company, what would be the best way to reach out and get in touch or learn more?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, Steve Schnall, Quontic Bank, or our website, quontic.com, Quontic. I think between those two routes, you find me, or anything you want to know about us.
Excellent. Steve, this has been a lot of fun, and I think people are going to get a lot of value out of this one. So I appreciate that. Many thanks.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Good conversation.